The smell of wood smoke and cold creek water is something you never forget once it gets into you. Beatrice Holt knew that smell the way she knew the back of her own hand. The particular way it clung to wool, the way it settled into the low spots of the valley before sunrise, the way it told you winter was still deciding whether to leave or stay. She was 26 years old that March, working the lambing season at her uncle's spread just outside Harlow, Montana, and she had learned, without anyone sitting her down to teach her, that the land here had its own opinions about things, and it was usually best to listen. She had come up from Billings 2 years before with a duffel bag, a veterinary technician's certificate she'd earned at 24, and a quiet determination to stop living her life at someone else's pace. Her Uncle Luther had bad knees and a good heart, and he needed help he could trust. Beatrice needed open sky and something to do with her hands. It had worked out fine for both of them. The Cutter Ranch sat about 4 miles up the same hollow, separated from Luther's place by a fence line, a creek bend, and about 30 years of history she only knew in pieces. She'd seen the truck, a faded blue Ford, one running board rusted through, often enough on the road to town. She'd waved. The driver had always waved back, 2 fingers off the wheel, the way men in that country did when they didn't want to make a production of being neighborly, but weren't going to pretend you weren't there either. His name was Harlan Cutter. He was 58 years old. She knew this because Luther mentioned it the same way he mentioned the weather, as a fact that had weight, not judgment. Harlan's been out here since before you were born, Bea. Came up from Wyoming in his 20s with nothing but a horse and a notion. Luther said this while pulling on his boots one morning, not looking at her, which meant he was telling her something he thought she needed to know and didn't want to explain why. She didn't ask. The first time Beatrice Holt actually spoke to Harlan Cutter, it was because of a you. It was the kind of March morning that can't make up its mind, cold enough to see your breath, warm enough to turn the mud soft at the creek edges. She was checking the south pasture when she found one of Luther's ewes on the wrong side of the fence line, halfway through a drift of old snow against the Cutter boundary, deep in labor and not making good progress. The lamb was presenting wrong. Beatrice had handled worse, but she didn't have her kit, and she'd left her truck on the other side of the field. She looked at the situation for about 3 seconds, then started moving. She got the ewe settled and was working through the problem with her hands and patience and cold-focused calm when she heard boots in the snow behind her. She didn't startle. "You learned not to, out here. You need anything?" The voice was unhurried, not the voice of someone who had rushed over or who thought he was rescuing anyone. Just a question. "Warm water if you have it," she said without turning around, "and a clean rag." He didn't say anything after that. He just went and came back. The water was warm in a way that told her he'd heated it on the stove, not the tap, and the rag was flannel. Something he'd torn from a shirt, she thought, by the way the edge went. 11 minutes later, there was a lamb standing on uncertain legs in the snow. Beatrice sat back on her heels and let herself breathe. "That's a good piece of work," he said. She looked up at him then for the first time. Harlan Cutter was a tall man, not broad but substantial, the kind of lean that comes from decades of physical work, not intention. His face had been weathered by altitude and wind into something that was hard to date precisely. He had gray at his temples and in his beard, and his eyes were a pale, considered blue, the kind that took their time before they gave you anything. "She's one of Luther's," Beatrice said. "I'm sorry about the fence." "Fence has needed fixing since October," he said. "That's on me." He looked at the ewe and the lamb the way people look at something they're glad about but don't need to announce. Then he looked at her. "You're Bea," he said. "Luther's niece." "Beatrice," she said. "But yes." The corner of his mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. "Harlan Cutter," he said, and held out his hand. She shook it. His hand was calloused in the particular way of someone who'd been doing the same work for a long time, and his grip was even, not testing, not careful. just present. "Thank you for the water," she said. "Thank you for the lamb," he said. That was the whole of it. She thought about it more than she intended to that evening, sitting at Luther's kitchen table with a mug of coffee going cold in her hands. Not the man, exactly, more the quality of the silence that had existed between them while she worked. She was used to men who talked too much when they were watching her do something difficult, offering advice she hadn't asked for, narrating what she was already doing, filling the space, because the silence made them uncomfortable. Harlan Cutter had not done any of that. He had simply been useful and quiet in exactly the proportion the situation required. She had not met many people who could do that. In the weeks after the lambing, Beatrice settled into her routines, and Harlan Cutter settled back into the distance that 4 miles of mountain road creates. She saw the blue truck. She waved, he waved back. But there was a man in Harlow, a man named Boyd Renner, 29 years old, who had come back from Colorado Springs with a real estate license and a new truck that still smelled like the dealership, who had noticed Beatrice Holt in the way that certain men notice certain women, loudly and without being asked. Boyd Renner was not a bad person. Beatrice understood this. He laughed easily, he was generous with his time, he knew everyone in the county and seemed genuinely pleased about it. But Boyd Renner had a way of looking at her that made her feel like a possibility rather than a person, and she had been a possibility for enough men in Billings to know the difference. He started finding reasons to be where she was. The feed store on Tuesdays, the diner on Wednesday mornings. He brought her coffee once, unasked, and set it down in front of her with a grin that expected credit. She thanked him pleasantly and didn't think about him at all for the rest of the day, which she understood, even then, was information. "Boyd Renner's a good prospect," Luther said one evening, with the elaborate casualness of someone who had been working up to saying something. "He's fine," Beatrice said. "He's got ambition. Got his mother's good sense about money," Luther, she said, not unkindly. He put his hands up. "I'm just remarking." "I know you are." She wasn't unkind about Boyd. She was honest with herself. He was the obvious choice. 29 years old, employed, rooted, pleasant-looking. Everyone in town would have approved. No one would have had a single question. It would have been, in every conventional sense, simple. The problem was that simple had never been what Beatrice Holt was looking for. She wasn't sure she could have named, then, what she was looking for. But she knew it wasn't the feeling of being a sensible decision. The fence came down between Luther's place and the Cutter boundary in late April when the creek flooded. A proper flood, not just high water, the kind that took a fence post and 8 yards of wire and deposited them a quarter-mile downstream before anyone could do anything about it. Beatrice went to find the posts. She was hip-deep in cold runoff, which was not pleasant, when she heard the blue truck on the road above and then heard it stop. Harlan Cutter came down the bank in his waders without being asked. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the situation, looked at her, picked up the other end of the wire, and started working. They worked for 2 hours in water that was somewhere between cold and painful, and in that time, they said perhaps 15 words between them. The 15 words were all functional. Neither of them wasted anything. When the last post was settled and the wire was strung well enough to hold until the real repair could be done, they both stood at the creek edge and looked at what they'd managed, and Beatrice felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with the fence specifically and everything to do with the fact that the work had been done well and without performance. "I'll get the lumber tomorrow," Harlan said. "Do it right." "I'll be here," she said. He looked at her then, not the quick, assessing look she was used to from men who were deciding what she was to them, but a slower look, the kind that wasn't deciding anything, the kind that already knew and was just sitting with what it knew. "You're good at this," he said. "The work." "I like it," she said. "I know," he said. "You can tell." She didn't know what to do with that, so she just nodded. He went back up the bank to his truck. She watched him go. The truck started, pulled back onto the road, disappeared around the bend in the hollow. The creek ran on. That evening, in the kitchen, Luther looked at her across the table with the expression of a man who has noticed something and is deciding how much trouble it will be to mention it. He decided not to mention it. Beatrice was grateful for that. Now, I want to stop here for just a moment, right here in the middle of this story, and ask you something. Where are you listening from right now? What corner of this country, or this world, are you sitting in as you hear this? I love knowing that. Leave it in the comments, your state, your town, wherever you are. And if this story is already feeling like something true to you, something you recognize in your own bones, hit that like button right now. It means more than you might think, and it helps more people find stories like this one. I'll be right here. Don't go anywhere. May came, and with it the kind of mornings that make Montana feel like an apology for winter. The grass coming green all at once, the cottonwoods dropping their cotton on the creek, the air holding just enough warmth to take the edge off the altitude. Harlan Cutter came to fix the fence properly as he'd said he would. He brought the lumber. He brought the right tools. He showed up at 7 in the morning and worked until the job was done, and Beatrice worked alongside him because it was her fence line too, and she was not going to stand on the bank watching a 58-year-old man do the hard part alone. He didn't argue about it. She appreciated that. At noon, they sat on the tailgate of Luther's truck with sandwiches that Luther had sent out with her, and they ate in the particular quiet of two people who have worked together long enough that the quiet is comfortable. "You going to stay?" he asked eventually. Not presumptuously. More like a man who was curious about something and had decided, after sufficient thought, that asking was worth it. Stay where? Here. Luther's place. Montana. She looked at the mountains to the west. The snow on them was going, except at the peaks, where it never went. "I'm not sure I could leave now," she said. "I think the place got into me." He nodded slowly, like that was an answer he understood. "It does that," he said. "Takes a while, but then it's permanent. When did it happen for you?" "Second winter," he said. "There was a storm in February. 3 days in, I thought, if I die here, that's all right. And I knew then I wasn't leaving." She thought about that for a while. "How old were you?" she said. 26, he said. She was 26. She did the arithmetic without meaning to, and then she put it away because the arithmetic wasn't the point. Boyd Renner came out to the ranch that same afternoon. She didn't know if it was coincidence or not, but he had a habit of appearing when she was outdoors, and he leaned against his new truck and talked at her for a while about a piece of land he was listing and a dinner in town on Friday, and wasn't it something how warm it had gotten. He was pleasant about all of it. He was always pleasant. She was aware, in the way you become aware of things you've been avoiding being aware of, that Harlan Cutter was still within earshot, packing tools into the bed of his truck, moving without hurry, taking no apparent notice of Boyd Renner at all. Boyd said, "You should come Friday. It'll be fun." "I might," she said, which she understood was not the same as yes. After Boyd left, she walked back to where Harlan was finishing up. He didn't say anything. He loaded the last of the tools. He checked the fence one more time, running his hand along the wire to feel the tension. "Good fence," he said. "Yes, it is," she said. He got in his truck. He looked at her out the window for a moment. "Be careful with men who are always pleasant," he said. "Pleasantness is easy. It's not the same as good." He said it the way he said most things, quietly, without drama, like a fact about fences or weather. Then he pulled the truck around and went up the road. Beatrice stood there in the spring light for a long moment. She had been told things by men her whole life. Advice, opinions, instructions. She had, as a general rule, learned to take them with the proper amount of salt. But that was not advice. That was observation. And it hit her differently. She didn't go to dinner on Friday. Summer came to the valley the way it always does in high country, briefly, beautifully, with the feeling that it knows it won't last and is making the most of the time. The lupine came up on the hillsides. The creek dropped to its summer voice. The days stretched long and gold. Beatrice had settled into the rhythms of the place, in a way that felt less like adaptation and more like recognition, as if some part of her had always known what she was supposed to be doing and had simply been waiting to get back to it. She was good at the work, better than good. Luther told her she was the best help he'd ever had, which, coming from Luther, who was not a man who gave compliments easily, meant something. She saw Harlan Cutter with some regularity now, at the feed store, at the road end, occasionally when their respective chores brought them to the same part of the fence line. The conversations were short and direct. He asked about the lambs. She asked about his horses. He mentioned that the creek was dropping faster than he'd like. She said she'd noticed the same thing. They were always honest with each other in this way. She had come to recognize it as a particular quality of his. The absence of performance. He never said things to impress her. He never arranged himself to be seen in a favorable light. He was simply what he was, which was a 58-year-old man who had spent 30-plus years making something out of nothing in a hard country, and who appeared to have no great need for anyone to be impressed by this. She found herself thinking about him at odd times, not in the way she might have expected. Not romantic thinking exactly, or not only that. More like the way you think about a piece of country you've been through that got into your memory and won't quite leave it. She thought about the quality of his attention, the way he listened. The way he'd said pleasantness is easy. She thought about the fact that he was 58 years old and she was 26, and she noticed that when she thought this, it came with a different feeling than she'd have expected. Not the jolt of something impossible, more like a question she wasn't sure how to ask yet. She mentioned none of this to anyone. Luther, to his credit, mentioned nothing either. It was August when it changed. One of Harlan's horses, a grulla mare named Pearl, 16 years old, got into some wet clover along the creek and colicked badly. Beatrice found out because she heard the truck going fast up the road at an hour when trucks didn't go fast, and some instinct made her pull on her boots and follow. She arrived to find Harlan in the barn with Pearl, walking her slow circles, his jaw set, with the controlled worry of a man who has loved an animal for a long time and knows what bad can look like. Beatrice assessed the situation without being asked. She had handled colic before. She knew what the mare needed, and she knew the order in which to do things. "Let me take her," she said. He handed over the lead rope. No argument. She worked for 2 hours. Harlan brought what she asked for when she asked for it, and stayed out of her way when she didn't need him, and was there when she did. It was the same rhythm they'd found in the creek, in the cold water, fixing the fence. The rhythm of people who know how to share work without making it complicated. Pearl came through. When the mare was settled and her breathing had evened out, and she was standing calm at the stall with her eyes soft, they both stood outside the barn in the August dark and let the tension out of their shoulders. "Thank you," Harlan said. "She'll be fine," Beatrice said. "Keep her off the creek pasture for 2 weeks, I know." He looked at the sky, clear and dense with stars at that altitude. "I've had Pearl since she was 4 years old. That's 12 years. "I know," she said. "I could tell." He looked at her. "What could you tell?" "The way you handed me the lead rope," she said. "When you're that scared about something, you hold on tighter. But you gave it right over. You trusted me more than you trusted your fear." He was quiet for a moment. "That's an accurate read," he said. "I'm good at reading situations." "I know," he said. "I've noticed." The night was warm the way August nights get at altitude, not soft exactly, but willing. The creek ran somewhere below them in the dark. A horse shifted in another stall. "Beatrice," he said, and the way he said her name, her full name, not Bea, caught her in a way she hadn't prepared for. "I want to say something, and I want to say it plainly, because that's the only way I know how to say things." She turned to look at him. "I'm 58 years old," he said, "and I'm aware of what that means to most people. I'm aware of the arithmetic of it, and I'm not going to pretend the arithmetic doesn't exist. But I want to tell you—" He paused, and she could see him choosing his words with the same care he used on everything, nothing wasted. "That you are the most capable, the most honest, and the most present person I have spent time with in a great many years. And I find that I think about you often, and that when I'm with you, things are clearer. I don't know what to do with that, at my age, but I thought you deserved to know that I think it." She looked at him for a long time. The stars went on and on above them. She said, "Harlan, I'm 26 years old, and I'm aware of what that means to most people, too." He nodded, as if he'd expected her to say exactly that. "But," she said, "I have spent 2 years in this valley, and in that time I have learned more about what I actually want from another person by spending 30 minutes working alongside you than I have from any other man I've ever known. So," he waited. "So I think you should stop worrying about the arithmetic," she said, "and ask me if I want to go for a ride on Saturday." Something moved across his face, slow, certain, and quietly bright, like the first light coming over a ridge you've been waiting on. "Would you like to go for a ride on Saturday?" he said. "Yes," she said, "I would." Boyd Renner heard about it. Of course he did. It was Harlow, Montana, and a town that small keeps its own kind of records. He was polite about it in the way that Boyd Renner was polite about everything, and Beatrice was kind to him in the way she had always tried to be kind. But she also did not apologize. She had learned by then that apologizing for knowing your own mind was a particular kind of waste. There were other opinions. People who said things about the age difference, about the 32 years between them, about what Beatrice was after, or what Harlan was thinking. There are always those opinions. She had expected them. She did not find them interesting. What she found interesting was the ride on Saturday, which went 3 hours into the high country and back, and in which she and Harlan spoke about everything. His years in Wyoming, her years in Billings, the nature of the mountains and the nature of people, and the nature of what it felt like to have found the place you were supposed to be. They talked the way people talk when they are not trying to make an impression and not trying to win anything. The way people talk when they have already, somewhere along the way, stopped being strangers. What she found interesting was that he never once made her feel younger than him. He asked her opinion and waited for it. He disagreed with her twice and explained why, and she disagreed with him once, and he listened. And both of them changed the shape of something they'd thought before. What she found interesting was the way he looked at the land, with a love that had no vanity in it, no ownership, just the clean regard of a man who has spent his life in a place and is still grateful for it. She understood that afternoon in the high country with the wind coming off the peaks and the land spread out below them in every direction, that she was not going to look back at this particular moment with anything she'd need to qualify. Luther didn't say anything when she came home late. He was asleep, probably, or pretending to be. Either way, she appreciated him for it. That fall, they fixed the far fence together. Both stretches of it, Luther's side and Harlan's side, working across the line, the way neighbors do when the land matters more than the property description. Beatrice was 26 and Harlan was 58, and neither of them talked about that much anymore, because the arithmetic had been examined and found to be beside the point, and there are only so many hours in a day. What was true was that the fence got fixed right. What was true was that the creek ran on through the winter, and the spring and the summer after, as it always had, finding its way through whatever the mountains put in front of it. What was true was that a 26-year-old woman from Billings and a 58-year-old man from a hard county in Wyoming had found, in a hollow in the Montana mountains, the thing that most people spend their whole lives being almost certain doesn't exist. Another person who shows up the right way, without having to be asked. That seems worth mentioning. And that, my friends, is where I'll rest this story. I want to thank every one of you who stayed with it all the way to the end. Those of you listening from your kitchen tables, your porches, your trucks parked at the end of a long day. This one was for you, for everyone who ever wondered if it was too late or too unlikely or too complicated by the numbers. The numbers don't always tell the whole story. Sometimes the whole story is in the way a man hands you a lead rope because he trusts you more than he trusts his fear. May God bless each and every one of you wherever you are tonight. This is Prairie Hearts. Keep riding.